February 14th, also known as Valentine's Day. We'll make this a sweet meeting.
Oh, my God.
The first thing we need to do is ask for someone to make a motion to appoint Kara Oliver as our acting court clerk. A motion from Mr. Hostetler and a second. Any other questions?
Discussion?
Any discussion?
Who was the second?
The second was for Mr. Alvin Lyons. All those in favor? Any opposed?
The peanut gallery.
You won unanimously. With that said, I'd like to ask Ms. Oliver to call the roll.
Mr. Hostetler?
Present.
Mr. Lyons?
Here.
Mr. Wallace?
Here.
Mr. Corman?
Present.
Mr. Ellison?
Here.
Mr. Burke?
Here.
Mr. Livingston?
Here.
Mr. Marshall?
Here.
Judge Covington?
Present. Please join me in Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Number 5 on your agenda, in your packet are the minutes from our previous meeting. Hope you had time to review those. Are there any questions or discussion in regards to those minutes?
Motion approved.
Motion from Mr. Lyons and a second from Mr. Livingston.
I had one question, Judge.
Yes, sir.
There was some money to the Georgetown professional firefighters, I think in the number of $5,000. That's for some symposium they had, and I had emailed Karen about it. Is our Scott County firefighters participate? I would assume that they are.
It's a yearly symposium that's been put on for
Okay.
many years. I think it's a recurring
Yeah.
event.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
Good question, though. Any other questions or discussion? Would there be a motion to accept the minutes as presented?
Oh, we got it.
Those lines and everything.
Okay. We're right. We're ahead on that. All those in favor?
Yeah, you did.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Number 6, the transfers as presented in your packet. Is there any questions or discussion in regards to that?
Motion.
Motion for Mr. Corman. Is there a second?
I'll second.
A second for Mr. Ellison. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Number 7, bills and hand checks as presented in your packet. Any questions or discussion in regards to those?
Motion for approval.
Motion from Mr. Wallace. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Livingston. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Now, let the record reflect that the sheriff, Tony Hampton, presented fees in the amount of $225,105.66, December supplemental, and then $25,399.51 January. Number 9, let the record reflect that the clerk, Rebecca Johnson, submitted fees of $104,419.12 for January. Any questions in regards to either one of those items? Moving down to number 10, let the record reflect that Mr. Livingston, Mr. Burke, Mr. Wallace, and Mr. Johnson all completed training units that they've worked on over the past year. Any comments or?
Mrs. Johnson.
Mrs. Johnson, I'm sorry.
I was looking up here going, saying everybody's last name.
Yes, Mrs. Johnson. Miss Johnson.
So confused.
Yes, sorry. Number 11.
Johnson, no, that's
Number 11, advisory service agreement with Compass Municipal Advisors, and this is a follow-up to last week's work session, and Kara passed out what you received via email earlier this week from Mr. George, outlining a plan and then an agreement dated February 9th, 2020, and The service of the municipal advisor, determine, analyze, and recommend options. Municipal advisor will assist in bidding of certain eligible securities. Municipal advisor will prepare bid specs to be distributed to a list of qualified sellers. Municipal advisor will review all bids reviewed at the required time on the bid due date and award the bid based on portfolio which produces the lowest cost, highest yield of eligible securities to sufficiently complete the escrow. And the municipal advisor acknowledges that the securities must be eligible investments under the applicable state of Kentucky, and municipal advisor agrees to provide written documentation or certification relating to the bidding of the securities. The municipal advisor will be compensated an annual fee of $10,000. That's the agreement, essentially. And then in an email about the proposal, his strategy at this time would be to purchase via competitive bid approximately $8 million in U.S. Treasury and agency securities in the coming weeks. These would mature in 3 to 6 months. After the securities mature, we'd potentially buy additional securities in September, depending on market conditions. The first purchase is highlighted in gray in the proposal, and the potential second round of purchase shown in orange. That was in the email, but I copied that for your review. What questions and discussions does anyone have in regards to this proposal? Oh, Bill?
I'm gonna make the motion that we accept this.
Okay. Is there a second? A second from Mr. Lyons. Is there any other questions or discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. I think that was wise, and I think we're being good stewards of our funds.
And look, real quick, when they bid these out, local entities can bid on those.
Yes, and
To be able to,
Yeah. He said he
Make
would-
the investment,
He said he
so-
would bid them to local entities like that.
yes.
I just want, I.
And we'll follow up, but he shared that he would make sure we did that. Next, number 12, write-in, write-out agreement. I shared that via email. Essentially, and I also shared that, Alvin, did you get the schematic of it and the location? Everybody got that? What questions or discussion does anyone have in regards to this proposed agreement? I do think it would positively impact traffic patterns and relieve congestion at that intersection. So,
Is it $20,000 county?
25.
Judge, I'll just quickly say that the city performed a traffic study of the whole area back in 2006, I believe, or 2007. And that was some of the suggestions to deal with Connector Road as well as this, and I think it's a step in the right direction. And with that, I'll make a motion for approval.
We have a motion for approval, a second from Mr. Livingston. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? You have,
Just-
good.
Just a quick comment or maybe
Yes,
question. And maybe it was in the email and I missed it. Do they have a projected start date, or what's the path going forward, or?
I don't
think
have
was
that.
in there.
I
just
don't
wondered.
know. I'll get it,
This has
I'll
been-
get with Eddie Hightower.
This has taken a number of years to get to
Yeah.
this point, right? So,
I
yeah.
think it's soon.
And we'll get that sent out here real quick.
Eh,
We'll check with him and get you a date.
Just wondering.
It doesn't need to linger, does it?
Well, it's been a long time
Yeah.
coming just to get to this point, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Years.
Kelly had a good point. Government soon or?
No comment.
Yeah, next couple years.
So
We get twice the speed of government.
that motion passed unanimously. Next, I'd like to ask Mr. Remley to address the court in regards to EMS new hire, EMS surplus, and EMS travel.
Good morning, Judge, magistrates. So the first item I have, requesting permission to hire Ariana Childress for a vacant full-time paramedic position. She'll be replacing Amber Ball, and her salary would be $13.91 per hour.
Quick question, Brandon. What is your staffing level now as far as,
If we hire her, we'll be back full again, so, yeah.
how many part-timers do you, I know you're trying to transition away from that, but how many part-timers do you have
I think
available?
5 is what we have right now. Yeah.
Do you have an idea of what your average tenure is?
Right now, I think we're about 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
Has employee turnover slowed down?
Yes, it has. It greatly has. Once the pay has come up, you know, we've dramatically.
I remember
cut the
one
number.
time we were at 49%.
Right. No, the increase, the pay study definitely made a big difference. Much
Motion.
appreciated.
Motion to approve and a second from Mr. Burke. Any other question or discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. EMS surplus.
So we purchased a new ambulance last year, and we replaced the 2004 ambulance. You should have received the information on that ambulance. Georgetown Police Department. So I guess first I'm asking permission to surplus that ambulance, and if we surplus, Georgetown Police Department would like to take possession of that to utilize as a crime scene unit.
Do we do that all as one motion, or,
Stacy said they could do it either way.
Surplus
They-
slash-
Unless somebody wants to separate it out, yeah.
I mean, surplus slash,
Surplus and transfer to the city of Georgetown in one motion.
so moved.
So moved and seconded by Mr. Lyons. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes.
Can we just give it?
To a governmental entity,
Okay.
yes, sir.
All right.
And then EMS travel.
So I'm asking permission for myself to be allowed to travel to a advanced stroke instructor update, of course, on March 31st at Riverside Hospital in Columbus.
The beautiful city of Columbus, Ohio.
Yes.
Couldn't find anything in Florida?
You need to go work for the fire department.
They go off.
Yeah.
Any other questions or discussion?
Motion.
Motion for Mr. Hostetler. Is there a second from Mr. Livingston? All those in, any other question, discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Rimley.
Appreciate it.
Now I'd like to ask our county attorney, Rand Marshall, to discuss proposed new hires.
Yes, we've got 2 spots I would like to fill. The first is a child support caseworker position. This is necessary because Beverly Parker, who was the head of our child support, retired, and we promoted Diane Gibson, so now we're filling Diane's spot. I'd like to ask you to hire Amber McCullough at $15.93 an hour, and she would start February 24th. And I guess we can do these together or separately, whatever the court's pleasure is. If you want to do them together. The second one would be Kayla Robinson. Sherry Mitchell, who had been with us probably 23 years or so, retired. And Kayla would take her spot. It would be $21.26 an hour. She would start Monday, February 17th. She's got 12 years or so working as a court-designated worker, which is the person that handles juvenile complaints, so she's familiar with the criminal code, which is very helpful. Let me say, too, I appreciate Jeff's help. We couldn't have gotten this done. He's been very, very helpful, and I appreciate all he did on helping us get these 2 interviewed and hopefully hired today.
And I'd like to second that as well, that the work that we're getting done there with Mr. Mudrack and company and Kara and such, appreciate that very much.
Question.
What questions or discussion do you have?
Did you say both of these ladies are new to you?
They're new to us, yes, sir. Yeah.
Did you have several applications, Mr. Mudrack?
We had 120 for the child support caseworker position and 56 for the child assistant position.
Wow.
Yes. So we had a lot of good candidates to choose from.
That's awesome.
Well, there's one other question, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Are they, but, do they live here in the county by chance, or?
Amber does. She lives here in Georgetown. Kayla lives in Fleming County.
Go Panthers.
You think she's near Ewing, Kentucky?
In Kentucky, God's country.
And we talked, about the drive. She's been driving to Harrison County. Of course, that's not quite as far as it would be here, but I don't think that's going to be an issue for her. And we talked to references for both of them and got glowing reports on both ladies.
That experience goes a long way.
Yes.
So, is there a motion or any other questions? Motion from Mr. Lyons. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Burke. And any other questions? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you all.
Now, number 15, compensation review, part-time employees. We've discussed this at workshop, and we've discussed this a couple times, I believe. And I have shared with you a spreadsheet with part-time employees and essentially the proposed rate from our HR department, from the judge's office, and then we've had presentation from Jailer Broyles. His recommendation is on there as well. Mr. Humphreys, do you have anything to add in regards to this at all on behalf of the jailer?
Just answering any questions that you all
Okay.
have. You all know what the jailer is requesting, so.
Yes, and that data is there as well. What questions or discussion does anyone have in regards to the information as presented?
Judge, I'll just say that I think that we need to stay consistent for all our employees. I feel like I understand what Jailer Broyles is requesting, but I do feel like that consistency is why we hired Jeff, as well as why we have these policies. And I feel like that's probably the direction we need to go, is Jeff's recommendation for our part-time employees.
Any other questions?
I'd make a comment, and just that I think that sometimes, I know we want to be consistent, but we got to give some leeway to heads of departments to do what they feel's best. That's my comment.
You know,
Is there any?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Mr. Hosteller.
I kind of, sounds like dovetail with what Kelly's saying, I think. And I know where Chad's coming from, but I've looked at this a lot this week, and one of the stickling points for me is, there's two or three. One of them is we got a constitutional officer making a recommendation, or sometimes we have department heads, and I put a lot of weight in that, and I think everybody up here does. But when I look at it and trying to remain consistent, for me it's kind of tough. I know in my world I'm an electrical contractor, so I hire electricians, but we employ as a county a great cross section of folks. You know, the jailers are doing a job, and it's different from the sheriff's department, yet similar, as well as EMS, as well as the road department. That's where, I won't call it a problem, but that's where I'm trying to walk through this, is because I do want us to remain consistent. And you know, that was when we hired for Rand's office, there's pretty good difference in those, hiring those folks in. And it sounds like from the comments and from the questions I asked that that a lot of what their reason for their pay rate is probably the experience that they have that fits right into Rand's unique situation that's different from other county departments. So personally, I'm down the road, and I've talked with the jailer, and I've talked with Captain Humphrey about how they use their part-timers. And their part-timers still do the same job. They're guarding prisoners one way or another. So they're doing the same job, best I can tell. But their part-timers give the jailer and his staff a little flexibility, as best I can tell from conversations. And here's what I mean. Some of their part-timers, a couple of them in particular, have other jobs, and they're just using this for some extra income. Plus, it gives the jailer some flexibility when he has someone who's calls in sick, His full-timers, whatever it may be, sick leave, whatever the case may be, he's got a pool, and actually, he could, in my opinion, if we went with his recommendation, he could even build that pool of part-timers who will make if we go with his recommendation, it will allow, I think, more people to become interested, because a couple of the folks got full-time jobs and they're seasonal, they're full-time work. So, but they, to my understanding, those two folks, and that will always change. I know that the names are going to change, But those two folks don't want to transition into full-time jail at this time. And so, but that gives the jailer and his staff another tool to, when he has sickness, because we all know the stress they're under because of the population that's down, the head count that's down there. It's always high. And so, in my view, I'm leaning very heavily towards taking the jailer's recommendation.
Mr. Burke.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Mudrack, if you don't mind, sir. You've put a lot of work into this.
Absolutely.
Is it your suggestion that we accept this?
That would be my suggestion. It was my recommendation that I proposed a very fair and impartial and unbiased approach, which was market-based. And I guess when looking at this, if a person's working on a part-time basis right now for $12.12 or $12.37, I would hope that for, in most cases, everybody's going to make at least $14 an hour except for one person, that they would be willing to work for about a $2 an hour increase. That's my recommendation going forward. And I think this will allow us to hire sufficient part-time staff to meet our needs. And then if we are unable to hire part-time staff, then I would recommend we look at it then.
Well, it's no secret that if you offer a decent wage, you can easily hire the best and the brightest that's available. If you have a suppressed wage, you have a tendency to attract the cream of the crop. And so in this instance, I'll cede to your knowledge and your better judgment of the certified senior human resource professional that we hired, and I'll go with your recommendation.
The one, we have one employee that's making $13.50, and that's because that employee was hired in with no experience, compared to as if someone came in with experience, that employee would be making the $14.
That's correct.
So other than that one, the rest of those part-time employees are at the Jeff's recommendation would be 14, compared to Darren's recommendation would be, the starting wage of 15. So we're talking about $1 an hour there. And then, meeting with Jailer Broyles, myself and Mr. Mudrack, we had some employees that had been here with us for a little bit and wanted to recognize that, and that's why there's some additional pay in that. So I acknowledge the constitutional officer, department heads, they work day in and day out with these people. They see how important it is, that role is, and I acknowledge how important these roles are. But I want to lean towards our professional that's put the time in to look at this and try to be consistent across county government, and that's where I would lean towards going with Jeff. Now, would I mind saying we're just going to make everybody that starts at least $14 an hour to adjust from $13.50? It's you got to pick which hill you're going to die on, and sometimes it's you know better than I do on that, don't you, Mr. Burke? So if we wanted to adjust that to 14, would that be that?
Perfect. And looking back too, since that one person's been here for, I guess now 7 months, 8 months, he has experience now. So perhaps he should be $14 an hour in hindsight. But I guess what we're trying to do is, if you hire in a person has no experience coming in, perhaps that person should earn less than somebody who has some experience. And that was
that was the whole
previously,
thought process.
You paid with a 25-cent an hour difference, and so I increased that to 50. But that doesn't mean we have to have that difference going forward. I mean, we can hire a person with experience, without experience, at $14 an hour if the court prefers that.
Alvin?
I was going to say, I appreciate everything Darren said, but in the interest of consistency, I think we need to stay with the recommendation. Even these part-time people are earning quite a bit more than they did a few months ago when they were hired before we started this process. So they've already gotten a significant raise. I'm sure it's not, everybody wants more, I'm sure, but because of, for consistency, I think we need to stay with Jeff's recommendation.
Now, one question that we have not discussed, and we mentioned it, but I want to make this motion, whoever makes the motion, I want it retroactive to, I think, January 1. What were you thinking about, Jeff?
I was going to recommend we make it, going forward, let's see, I wrote down a date here. Effective February the 22nd, so it'd be the next pay period, but
Okay.
that's up to the person sitting next to you as to.
Well,
whether
we
we
had
go
talked about this, just trying to, the thought process was that we've been chewing on this and we've talked about it. You know, even if we made it retroactive to February 1, how much trouble would that?
Well, if we could make it, I would suggest then if we're going to do that, to make it effective this current pay period, which began on February the 8th, would be easiest, I think.
That'd be, okay,
And it would be rewarding people at least one pay period faster.
yeah.
I think when we're talking about decisions like you're suggesting, that really ties into what happens in the private sector. If you look at how people are paid and going retroactive, how many boards or HR professionals or bosses say, hey, I'm going to give you a raise, but I'm going to make it retroactive to 2 months ago? I think that, you know, government and private industry is different. You can't run exactly the same management styles. But in decisions like this, I think that those things kind of run the course together. And I've never experienced in my life where somebody has said, you're going to get a raise, but we're going to do it retroactive, you know, to 2 months ago.
I've done that in situations where you have a person who's been an acting supervisor for 2 or 3 months, and then you promote them into that job.
Like an interim?
I just wanted to acknowledge, we needed to talk about
But
when
just
this
wave
was
our
going to be
magic wand and
effective.
say, look, we're going to be good guys, we're going to give you a raise. No, by the way, we're going to give you a raise for, you know, for a month ago.
So I have one more question. So maybe we've talked about this, and I apologize, but so if somebody came now and applied and had a lot of experience with another jail, they're going to be sticking to our beginning wage, or do they have the flexibility to give them the $15 an hour?
Well, for the
Because I think that's where I get hung up, is like
full-time or part-time?
part-time. And if
part-time
somebody's got
wage-
a lot of experience that he really wants to hire, that would be a good hire, I don't want 50 cents an hour to handcuff them, in my opinion, to not be able to hire somebody. But that's my question. Could he hire that person, or does he go back to,
Well, it comes to us.
Well,
well, then, I mean, how would you vote? You'd stick to your policy, right?
Listen, guys,
Look
I-
at your current people that are paid and compare that person that you want to hire as experienced to the people who are already in positions. And you got to decide, can you bring that person in making what you want to pay him? Or do you need to make sure you're looking at internal equity and paying those people that are here more so that you can have the room? Because you don't want to hire in somebody with less experience than somebody who's already here and pay them more than a current employee.
No, I understand all that, but I'm just saying, like, if everybody's at least making $15 an hour.
I want to get to a point where we have established policies and established pay rates with some modicum of flexibility in there, and I want to leave that up to our Human Resources Department. And I don't want this fiscal court, all 8 members up here, to be a quasi-human resource department and wave our magic wand every time somebody wants a quarter or 50 cents. I don't think that's what we're here for. That's what we hired this guy for. And to that end, I'd like to make the motion that we accept this. I'm not sure about back pay, but certainly going forward, I'm in for this, because I think if you pay a fair wage and you have good working conditions, you can attract the best and the brightest, okay? And if you don't have that, you attract the cream of the crap, and you have employee turnover out the wazoo. And that whirring noise you hear is a revolving door downstairs, people coming in and going out, and it makes Kara's job harder, it makes everybody's job harder, because you're constantly in a training and turnover mode. And we've seen that in our EMS department, and I don't want to go through that again. And the whole purpose of getting Mr. Mudrack on board was trying to stop that cycle of insanity. Okay?
Can I ask for a favor?
Yes, sir.
Before we consider your motion?
Okay.
For one more comment. Just along the lines, and we weren't ready to share any data, and don't really want to share any data today about it, but Jeff's been working very diligently on the full-time experience, confirming, trying to move that last prior experience.
Yeah.
He's been doing all that. How many have you processed? How many employees?
About 210 out of the 240.
So he's
I have-
almost
Yeah.
And he's worked that. I think that we need to give Jeff the leeway on part-time as well.
Yes.
To make those decisions to recommend to this body. And I think it's along the lines of what you were asking, correct, Kelly?
Well, yeah, it's just kind of a complicated issue like what Rick was talking about. You've got elected constitutional officers that are asking for something, and I put a lot of weight into that because I feel like they know what they're doing as well. And I mean, it's just one of these things. And my whole thing is, and I know I come from a different background than government, but I just really don't want to see somebody want to hire somebody and feel like they can't do it for 50 cents an hour. Because, oh my gosh, they've been over here 20 years. They retired from this department, but now they can come here and work.
One thing though is, I mean, you don't apply. You know what you're looking for. If I'm applying for this job, I know what the starting salary is now.
I know, but you may be talking to 2 or 3 different places. You may be talking to Lexington Detention Center and Paris, and you
might
probably
have to
go.
choose those others. I mean,
I'd
that's
like
just
to
part of
point
it.
out too, that
that's-
just because you worked 20 years and retired doesn't make you a good employee with good experience.
That's for another day. Now, Mr. Burke, I have,
And I can also say this, that just because somebody puts it on an application, doesn't always make it true.
yeah.
Well, and to answer your question, Kelly, I want you to know the way my mindset. I'm going to try to find a way to say yes if I can. But what you have to look at then is the impact it has on everybody else if you're trying to say yes. And sometimes you have to say no, unless these
Sure.
things happen.
I'm just saying, assuming they're lying on their application, assuming they've been a good employee for 20 years, and somebody says, "Oh, man, they'd be a great hire," but 50 cents an hour, Bourbon's going to pay them that, and they said, "Oh, I'd go with you." I just don't want somebody handcuffed for that reason. But that's just my opinion. And
Yeah, and I think that, they get, Darren gets the opportunity to come present his case.
I mean, we can get somebody with no experience for 50 cents less an hour that they start all over with.
Yeah.
Okay, that goes back to Bill's comment. I felt like he was arguing for me there for a minute.
Do you think it's appropriate for the one individual that's at $13.50 to be transitioned to 14?
Yes, I would recommend now to go ahead and just change him to $14 an hour.
So, Mr. Burke, you were going to make a motion. What was in your mind? Can you share the motion that you'd like to?
I'd like to make the motion that we accept this as written, that we give Mr. Mudrack the flexibility to do his job as we've hired him to do. Now, as far as back pay goes, I got a little bit of a heartburn with that, but, I don't want to go back to January 1st. I'd say let's take this and take it going forward.
Did you write all that down?
Did I write
No, I
that?
didn't.
That's a long motion.
Now, Mr. Mudrack, you
She
felt
watched
like the easiest way to do it was making it effective February 8th?
Yeah, this current pay period.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see a
I'm
head
good with
shaking
that.
from the person.
Your motion.
yes, that's my motion,
I want to make sure, Bill, you said as written, but with that one exception that the 1350 is 14.
yes.
Yes.
Any other questions? Or is there a second?
Second.
A second from Mr. Lyons. What other comments or questions?
Just one comment about Kelly's concern. We're measuring against the market median now. We have information that we have not had in the past.
Yes.
We're comparing to comparable jobs, so I think that will help with
It
your
does.
issue, so.
We're 80%, right?
Judge,
On part-time?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
just to add to that, I'm just sitting there thinking, I think it was Mr. Livingston, Mr. Wallace, and maybe Mr. Corman 4 years ago started a push to try to get us where we're going to today, which I applauded it then. It's taken us a long time. It still doesn't change the fact that, and all of this is positive. I mean, I'm going to vote for this and gladly do so. But I do put a lot of weight on our department heads and even more weight on constitutional officers. That's why they got elected. That's why they have that position. And one other comment, because the 1350 is kind of the range there. When I saw that, I frequent a local business in the mornings to get my wake up go juice and that kind of thing. And they've got an advertisement for $12 an hour for an assistant cook at this particular establishment that I've yet to see the faces change. They can't find folks, and that's with no experience. They're going to be an assistant, no kind of challenge. And I was looking last week after I saw this, that 1350, and there's some others, and I'm thinking, wow, here's person that they're looking for, and I'm not making light of that job. There's an opportunity for some folks at $12 an hour, I think. So, but I'm going to gladly vote for this. I
And
would
to
have
your
liked
point,
to see
Rick,
more.
and to your point, those are, those are labor market-driven dynamics, okay?
Well, they all
And if you
are,
can't
Bill.
hire somebody at 12, then maybe you can hire someone at 13. And if you can't hire someone at 13, you go to 14. And if you can't hire someone at 14, you probably ought to be in a different business.
Those places aren't going to go away, but I'm fully expecting to see that sign change.
We have
And then there's the jail.
we have a motion and we have a second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Let the record reflect Mr. Corman was opposed.
We started on this journey 3.5 years ago and paid Hannah Resources big bucks to do a wage and benefit survey and then didn't do anything with it. And I see this as the natural progression of hopefully finishing that journey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to ask Sheriff Hampton to come to the podium and address the court. I'm glad to see him safely back from.
You gonna do the
Glad to be back.
Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. The franchise agreement, number
Sit, Ubu.
16. After doing some more research, in 2008, this body actually did a franchise agreement with Time Warner, who now is Charter, a 10-year, had a 10-year span on it, and it was up in October of 2018. But we did a franchise agreement with them by ordinance, and it's now lapsed. Now, what we have is a proposed agreement, and after Rand's review, Rand's recommendation is that we bid this out. And I'm going to ask you to consider today to allow us to put out the bid, franchise agreement for cable services. And then, we'll go through the process and then see what bids are returned, and what information, we come up through that bid advertisement process. So, just another piece of information. Let's just go through the process, and whatever bid we accept, if we went through with what Charter was proposing, customers will not see any increase in their monthly bill due to this agreement. Currently, the state charges 5.4% in excise tax and gross revenues tax. What would change by us entering into this agreement is that the county would get 5% and the state would get 0.4%. So to me, this is a win for us and such. So is there anyone willing to make a motion to allow us to put this out to bid?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
So it was done, this was done before any of us were up here.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it was done in ordinance form with a contractual agreement in it that had an expiration date. So does that mean the ordinance goes away, or do we have to overturn that ordinance before moving forward?
I didn't realize it was done by ordinance. I'm not sure why it was. Let me look at that, David.
Okay.
My guess is, yeah, we probably do need to, can't think the right word, but undo the ordinance. Rescind, thank you.
But if it expires, we'll look into that.
Because
But-
I don't want to pass another ordinance or do something that conflicts with an ordinance that we did prior, and if the current folks perhaps didn't win the bid, come back and say, no, that's an ordinance, you can't do that. Even though the contract expired, you still have it on your books that this is an ordinance.
Yeah, so with that thought, because it's been brought up many times in the past, we've always been concerned, and I think, David, you raised it a lot of times, and rightfully so, we've always been concerned about making a contract, or whatever you want to call it, that could
Impact
could
future.
involve a future court, which that one did.
Yeah. I didn't even know that one was in existence.
Yeah.
And so, maybe that has to do with why it's an ordinance. I don't know, just throwing that out there, Rand, for consideration.
Yeah, I'll look into, I'm not sure why either. I'll look into that. I think we have to cap this at 20 years. This is a 10-year term and with 5-year renewals. And then the other thing I think we need to change, it has a provision that says, in the event of any conflict between this franchise and any grantor, which is us, ordinance or regulation, this franchise will prevail. Well, no, it won't. So, we'll have to tell them to drop that if they're a successful bidder.
So that had 5-year increments on it?
Yeah,
It had
it's
a
a
5-year.
Initial 10-year term and then 5-year renewals. But I think,
Okay.
the way I
initial
understand it,
10-year. So can we do it in the bid where it has a 5-year term with the option to renew for?
yeah, I think
It says it should be.
Is that what you'd like to have?
That way a future court has the opportunity to look at it and say, hey, we don't want to continue this, we want to put it back out to bid.
There's change.
So the bid be for a 5-year term with option to renew for additional 5.
Where are we at? When did that start? 2008?
8, and it lapsed October 18.
Okay, so we're already into, a year and a half into,
But we didn't vote, I don't.
that's what I'm saying.
haven't done anything with it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the way they wrote it up, it's all on their side. I'm just asking, I don't know any of those legal terms.
They still paying?
We're getting, it's about 30, but we're not getting the maximum that we could get.
Right.
You know, I think,
30 versus 70 or something.
right, 33 versus 76.
Judge, when you put this out for bid, can you bring the bid specs back to us? Because there is some details that I have run in with. I've been into this agreement for a while, and there's some issues that we run into.
I mean, that's just a generic,
So you're going to do a proposal versus put out crowd bids and, okay, all right, we can go that direction too.
can we go that direction?
Yeah, we might need to.
But I'll adjust this to make it like, non-exclusive be for term of 5 years with a 5-year option to renew. So, what other questions or discussion, and Mr. Burke?
We may run into some heartache on someone bidding a 5-year infrastructure type program if they have to add any infrastructure to the system. The 5-year may hinder us a little bit, I'm not sure, but it could. Let's ask for requests for proposals for 5-year and 10-year.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna make that comment as well, because that may be why it was a 10-year term, because you're talking about a pretty serious potential outlay for somebody that's bidding that thing, and you can't do it for a couple of
Now,
years.
I don't think Spectrum's gonna come out there and roll up all the cable to everybody's house, but somebody's gonna have to pay for that, or, you know, someone's gonna have to take that over.
Okay. You would like to entertain a motion that would move this forward to allow us to put out the bid?
Make a motion, put out the bid in both 5 and 10-year terms.
All right. Is there a second? Second for Mr. Corman. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Now, Sheriff Hampton. Sheriff Hampton, Alvin and David and I discussed and met as a budget committee this morning and talked about an avenue that we could go forward, and we all agree that we would prefer not to entertain a lease, but look at a possible option of purchasing. And one of the conversations, and I value Alvin or David to make comment about, you know, the number of vehicles. You've requested 6. You've proposed surplusing 4. The number of vehicles that we talked about was 5. Alvin and David, if you'd like to make any comment, please do. But what we've also looked at was from reserve for transfer, the court going ahead and making the budget committee making a recommendation to the court about purchasing 5 at $37,446.40. That's the Tahoe Police PPV Tahoe, you know, package, and then the sheriff's office out of existing budget lines look at purchasing the upfit of $14,381.79 out of existing budget lines. And then, you know, share with me what your thoughts are about that and concerns or comments.
So I just spoke to Michelle. I was kind of looking up in salaries, and we're doing pretty good in a couple areas. She said that's not an area that we can go to for equipment and such. I did run a tape after I talked to you this morning on some of the lines where I had a decent amount of money left, which is 435, 717, and 592. Those are all equipment and maintenance-related lines. The only thing is, I mean, if we use this money to upfit them, I'm not really going to have that much left for other equipment. But I appreciate the 5. We can make that work. I guess if you could give me some reassurance if I get in trouble or need some equipment after we take this out of these.
My question would be, is when were you planning on surplusing? Like, you know, if you go ahead and get the vehicles now, you will have them on the roads in the anticipated date?
I'd say we'd have them on the road in about a month if it was voted on today.
So then we could surplus the vehicles to possibly offset?
And those funds from the sale of that, could that go back into the sheriff's budget line?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't do that, does it?
Okay.
You know,
Where does that go? General fund?
It will go in surplus sales, yes.
Surplus, and then what happens to where does that line item?
It sits there, basically. But at that point,
just in revenue.
or the transfer from reserve.
We would have the option to do the transfer at a later time if we needed to.
I think Tony's concern is if he got down short but needed something, would the court support him? And my answer is Sheriff Hampton's record of being very, very good about budget and such. You know, if you really needed something, I don't think the court would.
Yeah, for instance, I checked my email on the way up here, and Lieutenant Hudnall sent out for a proposal for new MDTs for the vehicles, upgrading them. That was going to be over $20,000.
That.
Mobile data terminals.
Okay, thank you.
Computers, which say, I mean, they're necessary.
That laptop on the
Yeah.
passenger side.
And that's something we were probably going to buy at the end of this budget cycle. A lot of times we'll wait and see how we're doing before
How many were you going to try to buy?
I don't know the number that was.
But what Stacy and I had looked at were out of 435 you mentioned, and out of 445.
Yeah,
and
you
then there was one other line item that I looked at this morning with Alvin was the radios
Capital.
outlay.
So if-
But he may be.
Was that where you were taking that out of?
With that being said, on the capital outlay radios, that's been in there. Stacy's not here, but that's been in there for a few years. We just went to the new radios, and we had enough to put in all of our existing vehicles. So probably this 20,000, I would be buying the new radios for the 5 if you vote to buy them out of that. So
Mr. Hostetler.
Well, we're already talking about it, and that was the only stickling point that I had was if it would mess the budget up now. That would be the only reason I'd want to spend that extra. I don't remember what the number was now.
the
I
upfit
wrote
would
it
go
down.
to about 70,000, and
The upfit would be $14,381.79 times 5.
71,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what I'm talking about is that number that we, to go by the original proposal, we buy them now and make a payment in 6 months, which is in the next
Yeah.
budget.
That would be in that lease agreement, and I've spoke with GM Financial, there would be a 2% prepayment penalty according to the lady I spoke with, and we have to give them 6 months' notice on the prepayment. I would prefer just to try to navigate this route.
Well, those questions were asked, and I'm glad you looked for it, because if it was the way it was proposed, it was gonna be I don't know, the round figure was cost us $4,000 more dollars when we make.
It's closer to 7.
And even more, it sounds like. So, yeah, I'm glad I asked that, so that, yeah, if it can be worked out in this budget year, that was all I was worried about, messing.
And then there would be, as we begin our work on our budget for next year, there would be no line item we'd be ahead, kinda. I mean,
Yeah.
I think an important aspect too is that we'll all be here, I'm assuming we'll all be here come July 1 for the next budget. And so I would have more concern if we were gonna buy them all and then say we weren't, none of us are gonna be here next year and we're not gonna put anything in the budget, and then all of a sudden something popped, not from you, but if we had a whole new court and sheriff and something pops in the budget for 5 more cars or 6 more cars or whatever. But we know the story, we know what the plans are going forward. So, and we're all on the same page, and I think that anytime something comes up from an emergency aspect, financial-wise, I think that you can count on the court to have your back.
I don't think we've ever said no.
Good enough.
I didn't say that. I said, well, so if we say
like what
no,
he
if we say no, we'll still give you a great reason as to why we said no.
Yeah.
We're still having your back.
Judges, the motion have to request money be transferred, or, okay. But I'd make a motion, then we just buy
let me
the
double check it, Michelle. Does the motion, in my opinion, only has to be that authorize the purchase of 5 Chevy Tahoes at $37,446.40 off the state bid contract list.
And that would be for a total of $187,232.
Okay, that's my motion.
That's your motion? Second from Mr. Livingston. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor?
So on this, will there be any transfer, any reserve for transfer?
This funds will come out of reserve for transfer for that.
And then that will be on our next meeting on the agenda on voting on the reserve for transfer. Okay. I think, is that what you were kind of
Yeah, I didn't know if it had been made in the motion, but
Yeah, but we have it in our reserve for transfer, and we're comfortable there. So, did we get to the point of all those in favor?
Yes.
Got them.
All right, any opposed? All right. Sheriff, we'll work and get this done.
Thank y'all very much.
And then, number 18, Resolution 2002 County Road Aid Agreement. I'm going to ask Rand to share that with you all.
Resolution 20-02, Fiscal Court of Scott County, resolution adopting and approving the execution of a county road aid co-op program contract between the Fiscal Court and the Commonwealth of Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, Department of Rural and Municipal Aid for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2020, as provided in the Kentucky Revised Statutes, and accepting all roads and streets referred to therein as being a part of the county road system. Be it resolved by the Fiscal Court that the Fiscal Court does hereby accept all roads and streets referred to in said contract as being a part of the county road system. The Fiscal Court does hereby ratify and adopt all statements, representations, warranties, covenants, and agreements contained in said contract. Does hereby accept said contract, and by such acceptance agrees to all the terms and conditions therein stated. And the county judge executive of the county is hereby authorized and directed to sign said contract as set forth on behalf of the Fiscal Court of Scott County. The county clerk of Scott County is hereby authorized and directed to certify thereto.
What questions or comments? Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve from Mr. Lyons, a second from Mr. Hostler. Any other questions? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Now, new business and public comment. I have one piece of new business that I'd like to bring to the attention of the court, because I just like to make sure we're all on one page and everybody's aware. Conversations, I've had 2 or 3 calls about the completion of the surface at the Kendall and Friends playground at the pavilion. I've had a couple calls asking when that was going to be done. Well, in conversations with Ms. Rice, and Ms. Rice is here today, welcome. Ms. Rice shared that because of weather, that the hope was that the surface would be completed here at the end of February or so. But one of the issues was they were hoping to get funding to complete a fence at the same time as pouring the surface. It's better to do it all at one time. And a proposal, they didn't have the funds completely to do this. at the time. And one of the proposals was from the Friends of the Parks, is that they would donate $6,669 towards the purchase of the fence, which would be $12,510. And then the request was, could the county and city possibly contribute to get this done so that the surface and the fence is all completed at one time, and then it's 100% finished and usable by the community and those individuals that would use that. So, for $2,920 to get this done to help that segment of our community, I think it'd be a wise expenditure, and I'd like the court to consider just making a motion to approve that expenditure. Mayor Prather, in conversation yesterday, felt like the city could do the half with $2,920. And Kim, you're here. Would you like to make comment on any of this, or does anybody have any questions for Ms. Rice?
Okay, what kind of fence is it?
It is a 5-foot aluminum 3-plank fence. We don't typically put fences around playgrounds because they're public playgrounds, but for this particular playground, because it's an inclusive playground, it's designed to keep the children in, not out.
And that would be, it's needed.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely needed.
I'll make the motion, we spend $2,900.
Got a motion, got a second from Mr. Livingston. Any other questions or comment? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Now,
Or 2,900 and change, whatever it was.
so I want to clarify one thing. Because of bidding specs, we have a little higher threshold. The Friends of the Park's going to donate the $66,6950 to the county fiscal court, and then we will expend $2,920, and the city will send us $2,920, and that'll be done.
That was approved at our Friends of the Parks board last night.
All right.
Can I ask, is there a reason why that's not going through Parks and Rec?
The money was raised, the money was raised by Friends of the Parks.
All right.
This has been a long process. When the playground was initially put in, we only had so much money, but we wanted to continue to work on it. When we put it in, the pour-in-place surfacing was just trails to each of the apparatuses. But with the help from the state last year, we got a $63,000 grant to be able to finish the surfacing for the entire playground. So it's in steps. In the future, we'd like to put a shelter adjacent to the playground also that can be used for birthday parties or, and also bathrooms and a parking lot. So this is a phased thing, and the community is still supporting it. So.
Okay. Well, thank you. We'll move forward. You just get with me, and we'll tell me what we need to do. What new business does anybody on the court have to bring to the meeting today? Yes, sir?
Judge, we have 1,500 acres that we've set aside for a reservoir and adjacent property that we're not doing anything with. And I've had several people call me up with suggestions from anywhere from ATV trails to horse riding trails. And I'm not sure that ATVs and horses should be on the same property. Recently, I've had 6 or 8 folks discuss campsites on the property. And I don't know that, we need electric and water, would certainly be nice. I don't know that we need a sewer drop up there, but this is something we probably should consider if we're not going to do anything with the property for another 5 or 6 or 10 years. Yeah. The primitive campsites up there, $20 a night.
So along those lines, I think once we get the data from
the water study.
The water study.
Okay.
I think from there, then the court needs to consider, what do we do with that 1,500 acres?
Okay.
If the data says, hey, we need a reservoir, let's go fight for that. If the data says, no, our money would be better well spent on another water source, yada, 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 then let's go that direction. But along those lines, I'd like to ask Ms. Rice to come back to the podium. We've had conversations exactly with what you're talking about, Mr. Burke. about doing a, some type of, and I'll let the professionals speak to what we've discussed.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with Berea at the Pinnacles. Recently, I took a trip out to Berea at the Pinnacles, and they have an environmental education center that's not very big, but it absolutely serves the purpose that we would like to use that space for, to be an environmental education area where we could do some outdoor recreation programming. We could map out the trails for specific use, so that you keep your users, your type of users separate, because you don't want overlap on that. There's some users you want to have you can have overlap on, but not that. So the judge and I and Sherry have been discussing lots of different options that we could go out there. And our first suggestion is to do a master plan for that area, so the community can tell us what they're looking for.
And what we discussed, there's currently horseback riding that's very, used quite a bit in it, JR.
A couple years ago, we put some extra gravel out there, didn't we, for parking? And
We did this fall.
did we?
And,
Yeah, it's used and very much appreciated.
yeah, and then there's also some hiking, bicycle. They kind of coexist, and they, yeah, and it's pretty popular. So I think once we get this results back and we see where we're at, if it's not a reservoir, I think we should try to maximize that for our community, and exactly what you're saying, Mr. Burke.
This recent study that the city did, and I haven't had a chance to go through it page by page, I wonder if it mentioned anything about a secondary source of water or secondary supply.
I don't remember seeing that.
No. Okay.
Concerned about emergency.
Mr. Hostetler,
Just a comment.
this would be in your district, wouldn't it?
It is, and there are a lot of folks that horseback ride. In fact, they've got their own trails, they maintain them. I don't know if the county actually has any kind of an agreement with those groups. There's folks, there are bicycling groups that go out there, and they're on one half of the property, and they got their trails, and they maintain them. The horse riders are on the north end. They have trails that they maintain pretty extensively. They've even got a map of the whole place, and that they mark out for their riders. In fact, to go along with what we're talking about, there are folks that come from out of state with their horses. They come from out of state bicycling. I've been down there and met some of those folks through the years. And there have been local Boy Scout groups that come down and do camp outs and that kind of thing. So I think it's very much a master plan, depending on the water study and how that goes.
When is that expected?
Where we can use it, where the citizens can use it.
Maybe a contingency plan if we don't have a reservoir, let's have a contingency plan for the property.
Yeah.
I think this is a good conversation going
And
forward.
we'll continue that, and I agree with everybody. And, JR's been, when the Boy Scouts they called last year, JR went out there and made sure it was mowed down, kind of cleaned up, and had a spot for them.
Should have took the Boy Scouts.
Well,
But no, that's right, there have been.
but we want to continue to promote that. But I think once we move past that question of the water, then let's look at where we're going. And I think
a master plan would be a great first step.
yes, sir.
Even if we do the reservoir, there's still opportunities for all those activities there. We need to plan for it either way, so.
I agree.
Maybe in a master
Even
plan,
more.
you do an A and a B, one with reservoir opportunity and one without the reservoir opportunity if you're gonna go working on it.
Yeah.
Kim and I will talk about that then.
Can you have that by next meeting?
And for Parks and Rec as a whole, we're getting ready to do a master plan for us. So it may be a good opportunity to kind of piggyback them off of each other.
I'd ask for that to be incorporated.
Yeah.
So, all right, an A and B. Any other comment from anybody on the court? And then, yes, Mr. Hostetler.
Well, you mentioned last week, I think, at the workshop about the ball field lights at the county park.
Yes, sir.
And have they gotten all their holes drilled?
Yes, and it was less than 13,000. It came in at like 9,400 for the rock.
Well, and then I'm just wondering about their progress.
They've got all the bases up. They had taken down quite a few. Chad, you might know more than I do.
Yeah, they've taken down some of the existing lights, but the rain has delayed them, I believe, until they might have worked yesterday.
They don't work in the rain, we did.
No, they did, they did at one point,
But
but.
they've
it
got all the
too wet.
bases there and, the progress was
Well,
just held up
I
because of
saw a
rain.
crane sitting out there. I've been doing a little bit of drive-bys, but I knew it was progressing. It would certainly help if it quit raining, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Rain, rain.
I got
Mr.
one thing.
Wallace.
On March 6th, which is a Friday, when we have our workshop, that is when the Magistrate Association Conference is, and we might want to look at moving that to like a 3 o'clock if we want to have a workshop.
March 6th.
March 6th.
Would you like to make a motion to move it to 3 o'clock right now?
Well, do we have to do it now, or can we do it?
We can do it the next meeting. I
Okay.
just wanted to put it on
No,
everybody's radar.
I'm glad you did.
I also want to, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, this is backtracking several months. Maybe Rand's heard from him, maybe hasn't, over the conflict, I guess, for lack of a better term, between the county and the Ed Moore property.
I spoke to the surveyor, whose name escapes me.
Joel.
Joel Day, yeah, because
I'm lost for words.
And I have met with
And before our last meeting, I believe it was, I touched base with him just to say, hey, where are you? I think that was sometime in January. And we talked about him having it done in a month or so.
And along those same lines, I met with him 2 weeks ago and talked about that, and he said he'd try to have that done as soon as possible. But I also asked him to survey the current jail property, old jail property. And the reason being is because on the PVA website, the boundary line for the fiscal court property of the old jail includes most of the parking lot in that adjacent building. Well, in the last few months, the current owners of the church there had put up signs, private parking will be towed. And in the course of conversation with the PVA and then conversation with Joel, I just went ahead and asked Joel to survey that as well, so we know if that parking lot is county property. So we'll get feedback on that as well. And then,
that establishes.
anything you want to add to that?
I researched to try to find a description for our property. I went back to 1818 and found a plat of sorts, but I think we're gonna have to.
Is that for the jail you're talking about now,
Yes.
the old
Yeah.
jail?
Yeah, quite honestly, I found a deed out from the county to some business, and I found a deed from the city for the same exact property, which makes me wonder if, in fact, it wasn't jointly, and still would be jointly owned. But I have not been able to find a deed into the county.
That would be interesting, Mr. Marshall.
Yeah.
1800s, is Jesse still around?
Thank you for opening up that can of worms.
So with that said, anything else from anybody on the court?
I wanted to talk about real quick about our new Great Crossing Park. We're going to start play this spring, and I think just about every weekend is booked up with baseball and softball tournaments. And we just, with Mr. Tevis's help and the judge's help, we were able to reschedule an event to another time to be able to bring in an event that had currently been held for, I think, the last 8 or 9 years at least in E-Town. It brings in, there will be 16 high school teams. There will even be teams from out of state. There are only 4 teams that are in it that are within an hour. So we're anticipating that the other 12 will be staying overnight. And it begins on Friday night, the 17th, and then it's all day on Saturday. And if you start counting up 16 teams with 18 to 22 girls, and then all the parents, coaches, and everything, we're hoping to see, 750, 800 to 1,000 people that will come into the community for that weekend. So that's pretty fun.
That's awesome.
And the fact that we were able to get it from E-Town was pretty fun, too.
Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone in our audience that'd like to make public comment? With that said, we'll move down to 20. I'd like to entertain a motion to go into executive session for for KRS 618101C.
If Rand will read what that is. I'll
Yeah,
make
pending
that
or threatened
motion.
litigation, yeah.
So moved.
Second for Mr. Lyons. Any other questions? All those in favor? All right, we'll go into that. come out of executive session. Motion made by Mr. Hostetler. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Lyons. And then Mr. Marshall.
All those in favor?
All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you, Chad. Mr. Marshall, any comments?
Just note for the record, no action taken as a result of the executive session.
Very well. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Motion for Mr. Corman and second for Mr. Burke. All those in favor?
Amen.
Yeah.
Motion passes.
What's the story on the right in, right out?
The spring,
March,
paving.
Now I gotta go rewrite Steve's.
March of 2020.
Don't just go when they say March.